So we have two guests. We have Paul Frederick here to fact check me. So most of you know Paul Frederick, who's with FPR. I don't recommend that you give a presentation on a topic and have the world's expert on that topic sit in on it, but Paul will set me straight when I do things wrong. And also with us is Mariah Noth, who introduced herself to a few of you. She's here for a couple of reasons. One of which is, Mariah, you've been in this job for what, a year and a half or so now? And she has really impressed me with her enthusiasm for the work, so I wanted to include her. And also because she is someone who helps people like the people in this group. And if there's an opportunity to tell her a few things about Vermont's forest economy, this might be it. So I'm glad she could join us. Just so Paul and Mariah know, we don't normally have a formal presentation here. We have more of a discussion. So this will be a bit of a first. But before we do that, I want to do a quick roundtable around the room where everybody takes 1 minute and tells us anything they'd like about, what we've been talking about. Oh, Chris has made it in. Great. Glad you're here, Chris. Sorry, but I don't know what was going on there. So we're going to do a quick 1 minute around the room, having everybody tell us either what they've been up to or how much snow they got, or they're thinking about 80-20 or anything. You're in my upper left, Matt Smith, so we're going to start with you. What do you have to share? You're muted.
As far as snow, I just pulled in the driveway, barely made it in, barely made it out this morning. And part of that's because I'm driving a Jetta instead of my truck. But as far as the 80-20, it's been amazing over the last, I guess, since week 3, and it just keeps getting better.
Well, today we'll hit 820 even harder, and then I'll lay off it for a little while. Ethan Tapper, what do you have to share with us?
We didn't get very much up here. Like I said, maybe 3-4 inches. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me because I'm not running a business really, but I am in some ways. I talked about it a little last week that I'm trying to see how like 80-20 applies to my work with the currency that I have, which is my time, and trying to find ways to apply. But it's definitely an appealing issue because there's a lot of stuff that I want to do. I want to be more efficient. I want to reach more people. I want to do more cool stuff, and just trying to figure out how that applies to my specific situation.
Good. Chris, who made it in, we weren't trying to keep you out. I don't know what was going on there, but what do you have to share with us? Anything?
Well, we didn't get much snow here. I'm in Chittenden County, only about 3 or 4 inches, so not much at all. But, the 80-20 situation, I think I explained a couple weeks ago, that's something that we've, been cognizant on for a long time. The business right now is very, very good. Not a lot of supply, but a lot of demand. So I'm actually trying to take that 80-20 and turn it into 60-40. So expand my customer base.
Good. Tyler, who dealt with, I know we can skip the snow. We know you got more than everyone else. And I know you're tempting Matt Smith with your guitars hanging there, but what do you have to share with us?
Sorry, I got my kids in the background here. Yeah, just to catch everybody else up, we got like 3.5 feet of snow here, and it's wild. I spent all day screwing. I had to go find my cars. But with the 80-20 rule, I'm just starting out in my own business, but I see implications just everywhere. I'm thinking about like old jobs, new jobs, my personal life. I see how it works everywhere, and everybody that I've mentioned it to, they, I give them the example, 80% of your frustration comes from 20% of something, right? And they go, my God, yeah, you're right, So for me, I'm just like looking at, as I develop on my own, how I can use it to, to give warnings or to help me guide my decision making.
Good. So Allison, by the look on your face when Tyler said 3.5 feet, you did not get that in Bozeman. So what do you have to share?
Can you guys hear me? I've had trouble with my mic lately. You can hear me. Okay. Yeah, we have no snow here. We had a lot of snow. Like we had more snow like in October than we have now, and I'm super jealous of you guys getting snow, but it'll come, I guess. So That's the snow report. The 80-20 report is similar. I haven't been really speaking as much as everybody else, it sounds like, on the 80-20 stuff, although it did strike a chord when I was reading it. I have started to move on a little bit and gotten into the continuous improvement, so maybe that's jumping ahead but taking over my brain a little bit. So I don't know. That's my report for now.
And Everett's not here, but I can tell you he's jumping ahead in the reading as well, and that's really good. So we're going to spend some real time on that. So you don't, Paul, you're next, and it doesn't really matter if you talk about 80-20 or not. Talk about anything you like.
Well, I can talk about snow. We didn't.
Well,
we probably got less
Paul.
than.
You're the wrong Paul, though. So I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay, but you can give us a minute on whatever you want before we start as well. Go ahead.
So we did get some snow, but we got less than 2 inches probably. So.
Oh, good. Well, we're going to hear from you a lot as you correct me talking about Vermont and the forest economy there. The other Paul, what's going on up in St. J?
About 3 inches of snow. It's been real cold, but the timber sale that I worked on for the first 2 years of my job here, we marked about 3 million feet of northern hardwood. The first wood hit the ground this week, and excited to see some wood flowing finally.
That's exciting to see a plan come together and get executed, huh?
Yeah, oh for sure.
We'll see what. Who is Roxanne Vaught? Does anybody know that name? He was waiting in our lobby, but she disappeared. Okay, Gabe. Never mind Roxanne. We'll see what Gabe has to say. You're muted, Gabe. We're missing great stuff. Every time Gabe tries to talk, his mic's turned off.
I like being on mute. Works better. We got about 40 plus inches down in Paula. And I don't know, it took me 10 hours to dig out. It was pretty awesome.
I see. Now I understand who Roxanne is, and we're going to come to you in a minute, Nate. Gabe, so you came in a little late. We're just doing a quick round table, 1 minute, whatever you'd like to mention to the group.
Me?
No, I'm sorry, Graham. I've got two big G logos on my screen.
Okay. Any particular subject or just go for it?
Go for it. You got 1 minute.
All right. Well, I guess I was working on perfecting my 80-20 this week or last week by doing a lot of maintenance so I could work this week. So, yeah, I just actually came in from the cold. I had a little trouble finding the link searching through my email, but I'm here. I'm looking forward to getting an employee starting with me in January to help production along a little bit.
That's great news, Graham.
And
you weren't the only one that had problems with the link.
Okay. And one thing I did, just kind of connecting to some of the stuff that we've been listening to or talking about, in order to find, I've been struggling with a way to find the right combination of myself and an employee or two employees or part-time, full-time. And so I reached out to Vermont Technical College, where I had taught the timber harvesting class the year before, and I ended up getting an intern to train somebody up on the forwarder, and I can do that. I'll do that part-time through the winter season, and then his intention is to come on full-time when he graduates in May.
That's great. So Nate, you shocked me by coming on, I guess, on your wife's account. So I almost didn't let you in, but you got in anyway. Good. So we're doing a quick, give us your best 1 minute on any topic.
Anything.
Class.
Can you hear me at all?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, it's just been a constant stream of computer issues. I have like 3 going right now. So when one doesn't work, I move to the next and change names. 1 minute on any topic at all. Like, what have been some of the topics people have talked about so far?
How much snow in 80-20?
Boring. Oh, let's see. The lesson for me today is just I've been working on this porch job, and where do you call the line between like quality and overdoing it and try to meet a certain price point? Where's that line? Like, where do you say like, okay, this is good enough, I got to move on here, I'm not getting paid for this? And then where do you say like stop and say, what, this is part of my the certain work ethic, certain level of quality, it's just part of your business, and that there's a bar you cannot go below regardless of cost. And so I'm always dancing this line of being like, where do I stop and where do I just keep going? So today was a lesson on that one.
I think, Nate, you've got to own the fact that you're an artist if you're struggling with that dilemma. that for Paul and for Mariah, that was the subject of one of our previous sessions. So I'm gonna pull up as best I can my PowerPoint that I shared with you and launch into this 80-20 look at Vermont's forest economy. And as I do this, I'm going to invite, because one, we've got Paul Frederick here who knows this stuff better than I do, so he can interrupt and correct me, and really all of you, because all of you are living these things. So I may call on you at times, or I may say something you don't agree with, and that's fine too. Throw up a hand, or I think I can keep your faces up and show my PowerPoint at the same time, or at least I'm going to try. So let's see how that goes. Are you now seeing my PowerPoint? Yes. Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not just going to look at Vermont's forest economy from a supply chain standpoint, but I'm going to try to see where 80-20 can be applied, or where some things jump out. So in doing that, I looked at, the Forest Service FIA data and a lot of the other great publications that are out there. Well, it's no surprise to most of you that 80% of the land area of Vermont is forest, 4.5 million acres. Hey, your state is one big forest. That's the way to look at it. That's the way I look at it. You're a forested state. 4.5 million acres, 95% of this forest is timberland. And for the benefit of the maybe 2 or 3 of us who don't grasp that there's a difference between forest land and timberland, what could one of you foresters do to clear that up for us? What's the difference?
Is that last 5% national forest wilderness?
Well, that would be part of that 5%, but the difference between forest land and timberland is what? Go ahead,
merchantable timber.
Yeah. So just because it's got forest cover, it could even have timber that looks otherwise merchantable, but if it's completely inaccessible, then it's not commercial timberland. So we're going to exclude wilderness areas, excessively steep slopes, land that has a conservation easement that says you can't cut timber. Anything that falls in those kind of categories would be forest land, but not timberland. But the bulk of it is timberland. Okay, in terms of forest ownership, and I'm drawing from Randy Morin's work with the FIA data for Vermont, and I don't know Randy, I know Paul Frederick does and speaks very highly of him. He's done great work, and I think I've got some of Brett Butler's stuff when you get into ownership. But hey, no big surprise, 80% of the forest in Vermont is privately owned. 80% privately owned, and that fact alone makes it possible to have a forest economy. If you flip-flop that, like they do in the western states, right, Allison, where it's more federal or more public ownership than there is private ownership, there are a lot fewer opportunities to have a timber supply. Some public lands are managed very well and contribute to timber supply, but that's a little bit more cumbersome process. It's more subject to public interest influence. So private land means that we have a timber supply. And then if you dive a little deeper into that 80% that's private, 64% is family, and then 15% is other private. So within the private, 80% of that is owned by families. So you loggers and consulting foresters, and you, Ethan, probably know that, hey, those are the people largely that you're dealing with on a regular basis. Am I right about that? Yeah, so understand, if you want to understand, we know that Vermont is a forest, and if you want to understand the forest in Vermont, understanding those private family type landowners goes a long way towards doing that. How am I doing so far, Paul Frederick? All right. So this is a little bit more of a stretch, but the family forest ownership is Pareto-ish. So if we remember that Pareto's original premise was that, hey, 20% of the landowners in Italy own 80% of the land. It's not quite that way in Vermont, but 20% of the owners own 60% of the land. 35% owns 76%. It doesn't always have to be 80-20, just that there's imbalance. I suspect that if we went back far enough, if we went back, what do you think, Paul, maybe 40 or 50 years, it might have been more 80-20, but some of the fragmentation has changed that, or subdivision or smaller lots or whatever you want to call it, that may have tilted the distribution a bit. And again, this is from FIA data that I'm pulling that stuff out from. So if we look at the private forest land in Vermont that constitutes most of the resource, it's important to understand some things about Vermont's current use program. The current use program provides significant property tax reduction, but you are going to be committed to timber production. So if you look at half of the eligible properties that could Vermont, 2.4 million acres, 18,400 properties are enrolled in the current use program. Current use can be both forest and ag uses, but 2 million of the enrolled acres, 83% is forest. Everywhere you look, forest is a really, really important category. So 83% of the enrolled current use properties are forest land. Is that consistent with what you guys are experienced, or what? And I bet it's that way in most counties, but Ethan, probably not in your county.
I think it's there more or less. I don't know the exact stats, but it sounds right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in any case, there's that imbalance probably. So current use property is an important part of the forest product supply chain. So you folks that are dealing with these people, absent current use, would they be selling timber?
I think, Steve, that in my county, that's one of the main things that keeps folks cutting wood, is wanting to be in compliance with current use, and it's harder. I deal more with compliance issues of people not cutting wood they're supposed to cut than cutting wood they're not supposed to cut, which I think is the opposite of some of these other counties.
I think it's probably safe to say that, yeah, some of those properties absent current use would still be in the timber supply, but it would be different. There'd be less actual management, and certainly be fewer foresters involved. And the funny thing is, when your property taxes are high, you have that incentive to cut some timber to pay it, and then you get in current use, and you sort of have that, with the savings, I don't really want to cut timber. I run into that with the program in New York. We're in this program, and with the savings, we really don't want to cut any timber, but they're supposed to. And so you've got a good program, and it's one I know as we've tried to do some reform in New York, we've looked pretty closely at the way you guys do things. Okay, let's turn to the forest itself and forest types. You've got 38 different timber types present in Vermont, but that number by itself doesn't mean a whole lot, because more than half are sugar maple, beech, yellow birch, as we'd expect, and more than that are northern hardwoods. 6 forest types, just 15% comprise 80% of the stocking. In other words, if you want to know and understand the forests of Vermont, you don't have to know all 38 types. I bet none of us could name them all, even though there's a lot of foresters in the group. But we'd probably all come pretty close to guessing the 6 forest types that comprise most of the stocking. And that, incidentally, that's overall stocking in cubic feet. So let's look a little further at this. So tree species, Just 8 tree species: sugar maple, red maple, hemlock, white pine, yellow birch, white ash, and red spruce comprise 80% of the stocking by cubic feet. But how many tree species are in Vermont?
56.
How many? Did you say 50?
I think it's 56.
I think 56 is a good number, and that's the number that matters. I've seen numbers when I did just a quick look as I'm putting this together of 200 or so. You know, if you count all the ornamentals and cemeteries, sure. But in terms of important commercial species, there's probably, what, 15 or so? You know, with not only is it an important species in the market, but it is here in a significant enough volume to matter. So likely that 20% of the species found in Vermont are the mainstay of the forest economy. Or that's not an FIA stat. That's just something I pulled out to make a point. If we look at the forest size, age, and productivity by acreage, 70% is in the large diameter class, 23% in the medium diameter class. That's pretty common in these northeastern states. We have an imbalance in age classes. I don't think that's any secret. Part of that could be argued that some of its public land tends to be there. But hey, your job is to change that and put it back in balance, and the forest economy at least enables us to do that. 7% small diameter class. Here's an interesting stat: 85%, or the bulk of them, are in the 41 to 100 year age range. So 3 out of the 7 age classes. 78% of acreage is in the low to medium site productivity class. So if we want to roll together everything I've mentioned so far, hey, Vermont's a forested state. 80% of it's forested. 80% of that is private land. There's a handful of species and timber types that are important there. And most of it isn't the highest quality timberland. It's in the medium or low quality timber class. Gabe, does that sound like the world you're working in? You're muted again, but I'm just going to go ahead and say that Gabe's agreeing with me. Are you agreeing with me?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
So you're making your living in a handful of timber types and not the greatest quality timberland. Is that fair to say?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
That sounds familiar, Steve.
That sound good to you? Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
Familiar. Well, let's look at this next one. So if we look at all our stocking, you know, we have a lot of trees, we have a lot of timber, we have a lot of cubic foot of wood and biomass, and yet just 17% of total cubic volume is saw timber, right? And that 17% has roughly, and this is my back of the envelope, Central Vermont stumpage price report prices, 17% of the total stocking has 78% of the value. This has always been my go-to example for 80-20 in forestry is, you know, 20%, 25% has 75% of the value, whatever it works out to be. If somebody like Paul went to figure this out, he'd probably come up with more precise numbers, but I bet they'd still kind of fall in this 20-80 type category. That sound true to you, Paul Frederick?
Yeah, that's not too far off. I've fooled around with the numbers for the harvest, and it's very similar. You know, it's 75 or 80% of the harvest is low grade, but that low grade is worth about 10% of the value. So
right. It doesn't have the value. So as we get a little farther into what I'm presenting here, you're going to see that, you know, the 80% or the 83%, we've got to do something with that. And actually, there's a lot of opportunity there. But the 17% really enables, you know, Chris, that's why you have a job, right? Because there's saw timber out there, and people want it, and people all over the world want the products that come from it. Okay, saw timber species, 8 species. I think if not the same 8 that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so Ethan, I found 76 naturally occurring tree species in Vermont, according to some website. So I don't know how true that is, but 8 species comprise 81% of the saw timber stocking. So if you look at those are the ones that I think would be the ones most of you are working with a lot of the time. there's locations where, hey, cherry's important, but not mostly around, not that much. White ash, I bet that's off the list in about 10 years, but we'll see. We'll see what happens there. So even with it's just a handful of species that are really important. So what's the one species Vermont cannot do without in terms of a saw timber?
Sugar maple.
Sugar maple. Everybody agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. And not even a close second, but I don't know, maybe white pine, whatever you want to call it. But Paul, what do you think is the most after sugar maple? What can we least afford to lose?
I can look at the harvest numbers. I can tell you on the hardwood side, it's ash after sugar maple. As far as the percentage of the harvest, white ash is second to sugar maple. Probably white pine would be the other species if you looked at softwood.
Has that white ash number grown over the last 5 years with preemptive harvest?
I think so.
Yeah.
If you look at the percentage of saw timber, of ash saw timber, the percentage in the statewide is much lower than 25%, which is what it is of the harvest. So
I was visiting with Matt Smith and some of his New York foresters yesterday, and we were all kind of agreeing that the need to move the white ash has given them some forest management opportunities. Say, hey, let's go cut that and do some improvement cutting while we're there and improve our trail system. It's kind of an excuse to be doing some management in places, even if you might be there again in 10 years or something like that. Okay, employment. I threw this kind of in here, because it's very important. And this is 2007. Paul, you were probably involved with this, so it's dated. But I bet the distribution is kind of similar. So if we look at, so I took their graph and then I tinkered with it a little bit. I'm not so interested in pulp and paper manufacturing and furniture just because it's further down the supply chain, and also because Vermont doesn't have any integrated pulp and paper mills that buy pulpwood. So if we look at that, forestry and logging are 19% of the employment in this sector of the if you combine forestry and wood products. Okay, 19% of us are managing and supplying the supply that the other 80% or 81% rely on. You are the vital few in that supply chain then, right? Even if the number changes a little bit, the people that do the value-added manufacturing are really reliant on the timber harvesters, the forest landowners, the timber harvesters, and the foresters that manage these lands. And so to back it all up again, Vermont's one big 80% forest, 80% of that's private land, and it's managed by a handful of vital people with an important number of species. The minority of the annual harvest and of the stocking has the majority of the value. So we've got a lot of value concentrated in part of that, and you can do a lot with that. And then a lot less value that is both a problem and an opportunity. And I meant to mention, and I've mentioned in the past, that 80-20 type distribution in value is why we have dilemmas, I think, in silviculture and things like that, because everybody wants to cut the valuable wood. Traditionally, it's easy to cut it. You can make money on it, but you have all this other wood. You have the rest of that tree to deal with. You have the rest of that stand to deal with. And so the value that's in that 20% has to help you manage the low value in the other 80%. Well, Paul's just getting a swig of coffee. I thought he was jumping forward to tell us something along those lines. But anyway, so there's an inherent dilemma there that has been dealt with for years, and there's also an opportunity. There's all this material. How can we add value to it? And we do that in a number of ways in Vermont. I'm going to come to some of those in a minute. So I want to talk about the timber harvesting part of the supply chain. So Paul Frederick, earlier this year, I called you and said, how many loggers in Vermont? And you said, that's a good question. Yeah. So by some numbers, there's 700. On LEAP's site, there's 185 certified loggers who are mostly the business owners. So there are a certain number of loggers in Vermont. That's all we know. There's a certain number of logging businesses. Wouldn't it be great if somebody would fund the research for a certain researcher to figure this out, to document all the harvesters by system type and all that? That would be a great project. So there are bound to be some 80-20 relationships that we haven't found there, and I want to explore that a little bit, because I don't have. It's not like I can go to the FIA data and get that like I could. So I'm on less certain ground with some of the things I want to say next. So this is a very complicated diagram I did for the Silviculture Institute when they held a session up in Craftsbury. But essentially, there are 3 major ground-based harvesting systems in the Northeast. Hand felling cable skidder, cut to length, and then whole tree. And they are each somewhat ideally suited for different types of harvests and sizes of timber. So as a generality, no better way to cut great big saw timber than with a chainsaw and cable skidder. And coincidentally, the most valuable timber requires the least valuable set of equipment to harvest it, whereas the least valuable timber requires the most expensive and the most complicated if you look up the diagram. So cut to length works really well in not oversized timber, not too small, not too big, high harvest level, high intensity harvest, or higher intensity harvest. You're not going to skip around and cut 10 trees per acre with that system. And then if you're into the whole tree systems where you got to do complete understory removals and cut a lot of low grade timber, the whole tree system is what gets used. Now, how are they distributed in Vermont? Your guess is as good as mine. Bennett Leon and my buddy Jeff Benjamin did this study, I think in I don't know what year, 2013, I guess, is when it came out. In the northern forest region, 80% of your wood's going to be cut by what we think of as mechanized. It's all mechanized, but cut to length and whole tree, and the majority of that being whole tree. What that breakdown is in Vermont, I don't know. If anybody's got a guess, I'd love to hear it. But the bulk of the trees are going to be cut by volume, are going to be cut either with a processor or a feller buncher. That seem right? There's still people cutting with a chainsaw, but it's pretty hard to cut beech whips with a chainsaw, right? So this distribution is for the whole northern forest. I don't know what it is for all Vermont. So what I'm wondering is, if, and as in many other small businesses, do 20% of the logging businesses in Vermont harvest 80% of the wood? Anybody have any sense of that? Gabe says no. What kind of distribution do you think it is?
No, I have no sense.
You have no sense of, yeah. I'm willing to be pretty sure that there's an imbalance in it. There's a smaller number harvesting a bigger number, and just in terms of volume. But what that breakdown is, I don't know. And here's the other one. 20% of the logging businesses in Vermont make 80% of the profits. My observation in the Northeast is this is generally true. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think I would say that number 2 is truer than number 1.
Truer than number 1. Okay. Yeah. Or maybe that the 80-20 distribution is closer there than it is in the other. Because I'm pretty sure, looks like Paul got bumped out and I got to let him back in. I'm pretty sure there's an uneven distribution, but there's no numbers to go by for that. So I'd like to know that. Another great research problem. I'd sure like to work on it.
My sense is that there's an awful lot of people still cutting with chainsaws and cable skidders. And so number 1, I would say would be higher. The percentages would be a little bit closer. I also think there's a big regional difference. Like it's really hard to compare like the spine of the Green Mountains to say the Northeast Kingdom.
Sure.
It's almost like a whole different animal.
We see a huge, Steve. We see a huge.
Probably resembles more Maine and New Hampshire than it does other parts of Vermont.
Yeah.
Did somebody else was trying to add something? Go ahead, Paul.
We see a huge range of harvest systems here, and we do our best to try and balance the restrictions and things that we put on our timber sales. But there are a lot of guys here cutting with a cable skidder and chainsaw, and we don't have too many cut to length guys. And I mean, it's a pretty balanced spread of systems here.
I think the reason there's no one system that dominates, as like there are in other regions of the country, is there's no best way, because we have such diversity in everything that we've talked about here. Timber type, stocking level, harvest intensity, terrain, and then overlay that with all the quirky things landowners like to do and all their different goals and the different stages they are. And it means that there isn't a best way. The other thing is that, you know, that cable skidder chainsaw, that's a pretty low barriers to entry. That's just, you can park if there's nothing that suits you to cut, and you can go do something else. But you guys with big payments on other equipment, that can't be idled while you go and plow snow or whatever else you might make money at. So it would be good to know where this all lies. I don't have a good sense of the true numbers. I do believe that 2080 in profit, based on everything I've seen in 24 years of workshops and talking to loggers, and it's a combination of things, but ultimately it's management, in my opinion.
Hey, Steve,
So,
do you think that 80% of the timber volume comes off 20% of the land area in Vermont?
In a given year, maybe, but no, not in general. I don't. There may be a relationship there, but it may be a little more nuanced, like types of owners that are likely to harvest, and then you find that 20% or something like that. But I don't think year in and year out, 80% comes off the same 20%.
I guess I'm just wondering with the, industrial land holdings versus small landowners, if they're not disproportionately accounting for the total volume. I wonder if Paul knows the answer to that. What proportion is coming from these just very intensively managed properties versus those family-owned properties?
No, I don't have any data to support it one way or the other, Ethan. It's where we gather harvest information is at the processors, so we don't necessarily know what's coming off any individual property. So might be a use value question for Keith.
I suspect that because you're in industrial, and we don't truly have industrial land anymore, we have institutional investors, but you don't have the big proportion of that. So yeah, they're probably managing more intensively and taking more off per acre on a regular basis. I'm guessing, but you just don't have, like, that would absolutely, Ethan, that would absolutely be true over in the Adirondacks, at least till they finish really, as Matt Langley says, taking the last bite of the apple on certain lands.
Yeah.
But that would be another good research problem that we, Paul.
Steve, quick question from
Yes.
Mariah on that bullet number 2. Just wondering, is the thought of profit meaning that, like, higher value trees are only accessible to a certain amount of the loggers? Is that meaning that a certain percentage of the loggers, are able to access more business or do more jobs? Like, what do you mean by, like, what is the full profit pie we're talking about?
My sense of the explanation for it's not that only a few people get to cut the valuable trees, because I think irrespective of what kind of timber they're working in, obviously if you got sweetheart deals on stumpage and the one good deal a year and all that might tilt it. But my observation is some companies are really well managed and really implement well, whether they're consciously implementing 80-20 principles or continuous improvement stuff or whatever. Some people are good business people and are successful, and there are a lot of people that there are a lot of small business people in general, and so it's logging businesses that they make a living but don't make a profit. They make a way. They make as much as they might make if they took a job somewhere, and not a whole lot more. And if that's true, or when that's true, you often don't see a whole lot of growth. You have to make profits to really grow. Some people are content to take their profit and put them somewhere else, and that's fine too. But no, my sense is a lot of people, to me, making a living is breaking even. Making a profit is getting ahead, and that I think is what's going on here. It would be no different, say, than a restaurant business in that sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
So let's look at, these are genuine Paul Frederick gathered numbers that I jumped into here. The annual harvest. This is no secret to probably most of us, but growth exceeds harvest by 2 to 1. We're physically growing more wood than is being harvested. That's true of most of the northeastern states. Are we replacing quality on a 1-to-1 basis? In other words, we're taking we're taking a certain amount of saw timber out every year. Are we growing the same quality wood? Chris, what's your impression? You see what ends up at the mill. How has quality changed over time?
Oh boy, I'd almost probably answer that question that we're not replacing quality with better quality, but I don't know firsthand.
If I do a logger workshop that pertains to this and we bring it up, everybody says no, we're not. I mean, and that's from Pennsylvania to Maine. That's what I hear. I mean, some places quality is not the issue. They're just cutting low-grade wood, and that's not the sense. But people that have been multiple decades in this industry will tell you that the quality isn't the same as it was. You have any thoughts on that, Paul Frederick?
No, I think I would probably concur with you and Chris. I don't have any data to support that necessarily, but more of an impression, I guess.
And by the same token, we've got a couple questions. So by the same token, we figured out to do with this what to do with this lower quality wood that comes in. It seems. Tyler, did you have a question?
Well, no. Steve and I talked a little bit this afternoon about even age versus uneven age management, and I was wondering if maybe 40 years ago when they made that big switch to uneven age management, is that when the quality started to deteriorate?
I'm not quite that old, and I'm not going to point fingers at any other persons here, but I can tell you quality started deteriorating from about the time I entered the industry in the late 80s. Graham, do you have just one more
yeah,
thought? Just a sec. So as we high graded those stands, the option was even age management. But go ahead, Graham.
So I was wondering if we just haven't seen yet the fruits of better management, say in the last 20 years. So, maybe I know that the 70s, 80s, and 90s were fairly extractive and maybe not quite as scientific. I'm wondering now that, since we have been harvesting chips and things like that for the last 20, 30 years, maybe we just haven't seen the quality improve and grow into, merchantable stems yet.
That's a good point, and it's going to take a while to see that. Probably, I would expect we'd see it first on the state lands that have been a little more intensively managed. Nate, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I guess my question to the group is, what are some of the qualifiers that represent quality that you're talking about here? Why is one tree better than another?
Yeah. Let's have Chris answer that because he knows what the mill wants.
So I think, color is a big factor. The heartwood, if that's undesirable, I think that probably comes into play when people start thinking about quality. You start talking about knots, of course, and other issues, size, things like that, I think.
Yeah, clear straight stems that don't have a lot of defect. So they need time to grow. They need to have not been all marked up last time you skid wood past them. They need to be crowded in a way that doesn't mean they're all epicormic branches from top to bottom. And it's hard to get those things. People aren't patient. Most of the consultants I know will tell you they're really proud of a timber sale they did. And then they drive by and they retained a lot of good young growing stock. And 10 years later, somebody's there cutting 14-inch stems that, you know, should have been let to grow to 18 or 20 inches. It's a pretty common thing. So going back to the annual timber harvest, growth exceeds, so 2-to-1 growth exceeding. By 2018, 26% saw logs, 74% other products. So that was the breakdown that Paul alluded to. So then the breakdown of non-saw log harvest is 78% roundwood, 22% wood chips. 78% roundwood and then 22% wood chips. That surprised me a little bit, but maybe it's the year. Do you have any thoughts on that, Paul? Previous years, there wasn't as much of a roundwood market. The 2 years prior?
Yeah, we certainly saw some increased pulpwood markets over the last few years. I'm sure that by next year we'll see that go the other way.
So for some of you that don't know, so pulpwood in Vermont is either got to go to New York or Maine for the most part. Pulpwood quality stems also are used to make heating chips for the various heating plants. And then a lesser quality chip goes to the electrical plants. In the absence of a market for roundwood, some of that better roundwood will go through the chipper just for an energy chip at times. So that's like a Burlington Electric or the various or Highgate, or I don't know what's even open in New Hampshire anymore.
Berlin, not much else.
And by the way, the dirty little secret at Burlington Electric is most of your wood's coming from New York, right?
Shh, don't tell anybody.
I'm friends with your main supplier from there, and I'm tempted to bring him in here. He wouldn't quite be like talking to Carrie Rogers, so I'm not sure if I want to bring him in for an interview or not. So where do the saw logs go? Well, over half are exported to other states. And I think for some people this is an issue, but remember, Vermont is a small state, so it's not a surprise that wood from Vermont might cross the river or cross the border somewhere and go to another mill. New York also Vermont also imports logs. Again, you've got sawmills on the Connecticut River. Why wouldn't they bring wood in from 3 other states, right? Vermont, at least by the latest directory on Paul's site, has about 75 sawmills. And Paul, and I think I want to come back to the sawmills, and I want to come back to the sawmills in a minute. So where do the other products go? I alluded to paper mills in New York and Maine. When those mills close or take less wood, guess where Vermont sits in terms of the big scheme of things? Farther out, it's easy for Maine to shut off Vermont wood, right? Because it's farther away. Wind energy plants, wood heating plants. Vermont leads the nation in wood heating plants at your schools and colleges and places. Firewood processors, other specialty plants. Gabe's got one down his way that takes low-grade wood and does something with it. What do they do at Meadowy over there?
Heat their boilers with it.
Okay, so they take it just for heat.
Yeah.
And then consumers. People buy loads of firewood. They buy split firewood. They buy loads of firewood logs. They cut it up. You're in Vermont, and you're going to burn wood. So that's one of the things that happens. So here, I wanted to come back to sawmills. There's 75 sawmills. Paul, what's the cutoff of what you're calling a sawmill? Because certainly you've got a lot of small band mills and mills on the low end of the production side.
That in the directory, it would probably be almost anything.
Whoever responded.
Yeah.
In other words.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's voluntary. It's more a marketing thing than anything else.
So
probably something more like 40, 45 mills that produce that are 1 million feet or more a year.
And I expect that 80/20 would kind of apply there. A handful of those mills produce most of the volume of wood. Yeah, Chris, would you agree with that? And
Yeah.
yeah, and then that's not to say those other ones are unimportant. They may be an important market to individual suppliers, important to the people they supply. I mean, there's a good niche to have a small mill. That's not a bad business to be in at certain times. But if we're talking about where does most of the wood go, well, I bet you we could name the mills that saw most of them pretty quickly, right? So who wants to take a stab at it? 5, okay. Paul's
One
gonna rattle them
hand.
off for us. Which ones are they?
You want me to rattle them off, or you guys want to do it?
Well, you'll get it right.
Sir Sosimo,
Sosimo.
A. Johnson, Allard, 3 of them.
Lamel.
So if you go to Pine, Lamel, Sear, Mill River, you can decide whether you want to count Britons or not.
Yeah, and Sear just burned.
Sear just had a fire.
Those of you that don't know, sawmills have a high frequency of burning down. That's just something that happens in the sawmill business, and it's unfortunate. Matt, did you have a question?
No, I was just answering the question. I always think of China first of all. A lot of the high value saw logs end up there, and then Canada, places like Amex, and all the various places that pay a lot more for pine than any American pine mill.
Right, and then your spruces and fir are going to go to Canadian mills because that's who can saw 5-inch logs, and it's really not that far away. Yeah, probably if you took a closer look at the highest grades, both of logs and then of lumber, they're going to go somewhere else to be processed, not by volume, but just by high. There's no active. There's not too many veneer mills in Vermont, are there, Paul? There's just
Columbia. Yeah, just Columbia now.
And they don't use the highest grade of veneer log either, right? Those are rotaries there.
It's a rotary mill. They're not slicing. So
again, the small mills having a lot of hours. They're the types of people I would like to see in this class. I was hoping to have Joel Currier, and I'm really hoping to get him next year, and some people like that to participate here. And just to mention, Brattleboro, Chris, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but that's as big a sawmill town as there is in the Northeast, isn't it? Right,
yeah, it was Sosimo. Yeah, it's Sosimo and Allard.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big deal mill town, and that's I guess that's how I think of it. Somebody else might think of it, Brattleboro, as something else, but they employ a lot of people, and they bring wood in from multiple locations and send lumber around the world. Chris, you want to tell us, maybe, I'm getting towards the end of this, but maybe, so the wood that's sawn in Vermont, where does it go? Where does it mostly get used for?
You talking about lumber or logs?
Lumber.
Lumber, mostly for cabinets, flooring, and furniture.
How much of the lumber? How much lumber gets used in Vermont, either produced here or brought from? If you need lumber, you're going to buy it from wherever you can get it on the day you need it, right? Doesn't matter if it came from across.
How much of it stays in the state? Very little. There aren't many secondary wood manufacturing companies anymore, so I'd say 60-70% maybe leaves the state as lumber.
So there's a supply here, and there's we could go forever down, talk about Act 250 and different reasons why. There's a bunch of reasons why we don't have more manufacturing, but that's a topic for another day. Low wood grade uses, that 80%. Firewood pulp chips, we talked about that. Maple syrup. I wanted to throw this in here because it's an opportunity to show you a picture of my favorite. I like all you people, but my favorite Vermonter by a long mile is Blaine Moore from down in Sharon, Vermont. Lives on Moore Road, ran the Maverick Sugar Bush forever. Paul took a ride over there with me. So just to look at it, Vermont does lead the nation in maple syrup production. I don't know what to make of the 54 million number that I saw on some website. Do 20% of the producers make 80% of the syrup? Well, there's an awful lot of little producers, so that could be. Did you guys know that Canada produces 80% of the world's maple syrup? And that's pretty much all going to be on that St. Lawrence River corridor, right? Because that's where you have hard maple. Three states, 23% of producers produce 80% of the syrup in the U.S. So the very great states of Vermont, New York, and Maine are producing most of the U.S. made syrup. So that we don't have any syrup makers other than us amateurs in the group, but I thought I'd throw that in there. So Vermont's forest economy, just a summary of my 80-20 looked at thing. 80-20 is everywhere if you look for it, but I find it to be a useful way to describe what's going on. 80% of Vermont's forest, 80% of that's privately owned. The 20% of the people in the workforce that operate the land and are part of the working landscape are supplying the other 80% who do secondary processing. Wouldn't it be great if we had an FIA-like database so we could know more about these things? I wish Lynelle, and I know she intended to be here today. I'm glad that Mariah's here. Fostering these small businesses that rely on this resource is a great way to protect open space in Vermont. That's the benefit to everybody from protecting open space comes from supporting these businesses. And again, Vermont's forest economy isn't an island in itself. It's intertwined. Quebec and Canada are important partners, all the other northeastern states. When you're a small state, you interact. We've got plenty of foresters and timber harvesters that work in multiple states, because if you're near a border, you're going to do those things. There's wood flowing in all directions. And I wasn't sucking up to Paul, but I looked for some great pictures of Vermont for this last slide, and I have Vermont's first ever female state forester who recently retired is in the picture here. So that's what I have to say on an 80-20 look at Vermont's forest economy. We should probably take a couple minutes if anyone wants to say anything. Paul, you want to rebut anything I said or correct it, or?
No, I think you did very well. I looked at the presentation beforehand and I didn't see anything that I needed to comment on, to be honest with you.
Were you relieved that I didn't ask you to make a presentation?
Absolutely.
I thought that's a good way to get Paul on here. Mariah, do you have anything you want to share with the group or any questions or comments?
I mean, I'm definitely just really excited to be here and learn a lot more. The 80-20 is new to me, so this is just super fascinating how it applies to so many working lands businesses and to my own work as well. I guess just to share with folks who I didn't get to meet at the beginning, and is just that, I work for the Vermont Farm and Forest Viability Program, and so we're working with Steve to create these education resources, but also to do business advising work in a variety of levels. And so if folks are interested in kind of continuing on and thinking about how to grow or transition your business in different ways, like that's really what we're here for. And I'm happy to throw my information in the chat so folks can feel free to follow up with me as well.
Well, thanks for joining us, Mariah, and we'll have you back as a guest again in a future session, and maybe try and recruit. If we're able to put on a session next year, I'm hoping you can be in it. So Monday we're going to talk about advice to your younger self. If you would fill out, I'll send a link to that survey again, and I'll compile it and put it together in notes so we can talk about it. So next time. There'll be more talk from the rest of you and less talk from me, I hope. There was a lively text exchange last Friday. I was out in my hot tub not paying any attention to it, but I like to encourage that, and hopefully it's not annoying the people that aren't participating. Any last words from anybody? Okay, I've got one last. I usually put a quote on a slide. I closed it already, but I'll pull it up again. It's not a Naval Ravikant quote. I ran out of good ones from him. So it's, okay, hard work leads to low returns. Insight and doing what we want lead to high returns. And that was from Richard Koch, the author of 80-20. So thanks for hanging in there for a little bit longer this week. Look forward to seeing some of you on, hopefully all of you on Monday.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Great
Steve.
to meet you guys.